Welcome back to our anthropological analysis of the Chad hypothesis. If you missed the first video in the series, check out the link in the description. The Chad hypothesis leans on some early 2000s research into oxytocin releasing during sexual intercourse. The idea is this chemical facilitates pair bonding, and the wider variety of partners a person attempts to bond with in this way, the less effective the chemical becomes at facilitating bonding. Similar to how people get desensitized to sugar or caffeine. Some right-wing podcasters have taken this idea and turbocharged it to assert that pornography use reduces an individual's ability to pair bond in the future, and that this is an irreversible change. Further research is required. As stated in the first video, the Chad hypothesis asserts that traits such as being kind or having a stable job come after the woman rules out whoever she is not attracted to. Believers of this hypothesis must partake in translations when speaking with women because they strictly believe that women are not honest. For example, if a woman says she wants a sensitive man who supports her, what they think she really means is she wants a man who she finds sexually attractive and is also sensitive and supporting. However, those other qualities are more of a nice to have and not a requirement. Therefore, she will pursue partners who are not suited to long-term relationships to her own detriment. Anthropologists note this rewriting of what others say is used by many groups in the modern world, decoding dog whistles from certain groups to figure out what they mean but are unwilling to say, or reading between the lines to pick up on socially taboo information. This type of communication has its roots in ancient history and is often a source of difficulty for anthropologists attempting to understand ancient cultures. Because certain assumptions are left out of the plain text. For example, if most of modern writing was lost to history and future anthropologists found that the terms Bridgegate and Pizzagate but did not have the reference of Watergate, they might be confused why the suffix gate is added to certain nouns, and they might completely miss that these terms are referring to events, not objects. The hypothesis goes on. Since women are viewed as the gatekeepers of sex, it is viewed as men's responsibility to pursue sex and women's responsibility to pursue a relationship. The term friend zone is used by men to describe when they notice a woman's perspective of her relationship with a man does not match his perspective of their relationship, usually referring to when the man is attempting to build a friendship as a means to an end of pursuing a romantic relationship, but the friendship becomes too strong and the woman categorizes the man as kin or kin-like, and thus ineligible for romantic consideration. The term is also used when the man is attempting to be upfront about his motives for treating one particular woman differently than anyone else, as long as the woman doesn't recognize it as a romantic pursuit. The term is derived from popular media of the mid-2000s when characters were written to say things such as, "I like you, but I don't want to risk our friendship," or "I wish I could find a man like you." At this time, it is unclear if these fictional characters have any basis in historicity or if they represent the writer's unfounded fears. Due to this definition of which goals each partner is responsible for pursuing, the Chad hypothesis blames men for being unworthy of sex if they haven't experienced it, or if it has been too long since they experienced it. The trope goes back decades in comedy shows, displaying the buffoon husband who has to sleep on the couch. Similarly, the Chad hypothesis blames women for relationships ending. It is her responsibility to use sex as a tool to keep her desired man in the relationship. Therefore, a one-night stand signals to the group that this woman has nothing to offer beyond sex. This view is very transactional, and believers of the Chad hypothesis are proud of that. They believe that they've seen through the facade of courting rituals, and they look down upon others who should know the truth but are unwilling to address it. There are splinter groups within the believers which add caveats to the hypothesis. One such splinter believes that humans are fighting against their biological drives to pursue long-term monogamous relationships. Their solution is to align ourselves more with bonobos rather than chimpanzees, treating sex as something that can just happen and doesn't need strings attached. This group is often supportive of nudist life and desexualizing secondary characteristics such as breasts and buttocks. They view the hyper-competitiveness and rigid responsibility structure as an unfortunate reality which is a vestigial remnant of Victorian and puritanical society which Britain and the USA have imposed on most of the planet against the natural order. A New York Times article from 2010 appears to support the Chad hypothesis, although this is not a scientific paper. It describes how college and university populations are normally between 55 and 60% female. One female student says, quote, "Out of that 40%, there are maybe 20% that we would consider. And out of those 20, 10 have girlfriends. So all the girls are fighting over that 10%. End of quote. The article says, quote, "Thanks to simple laws of supply and demand, it is often the women who must assert themselves romantically or be left alone on Valentine's Day." End of quote. Link in the description. As with most media articles, the reader can draw contradictory conclusions from the plain text. Let's take the first quote at face value. Out of 10 students, 6 are female, 4 are male. One of the males has a girlfriend, which leaves 5 women and 3 men. But the woman interviewed implies that 2 of these 3 men are undesirable, so 5 women attempting to court 1 man. This allies with the cynicism of the Chad hypothesis, which indicates that only the top 20% or so of men are considered Chad and thus desirable to women. It is their belief that if one of those 2 undesirable men were to somehow make themselves slightly more desirable than the third, suddenly those 5 women would pursue only him and completely ignore the other man that they had previously been pursuing. The contradictory reading of the article is that other colleges have only 45% female students, which implies the reverse phenomenon would occur, with 5 men pursuing 1 woman while viewing 2 women as undesirable. This alternative interpretation is often ignored by believers of the Chad hypothesis. The article continues. Another female student says, quote, "Girls feel pressured to do more than they're comfortable with, to lock it down," end of quote, which is consistent with earlier remarks that women are fighting over the same men instead of going after the men who are doomed to remain single. However, this also implies that the female students consider themselves failures or incomplete if they are single, which is probably true for a segment of the population, but probably not for the entire population of female students. This relates back to how the Chad hypothesis only applies to a narrow demographic. Any of these female students who are not actively looking for a partner when single is by definition excluded when believers discuss statistics. However, the percentage of female students excluded from the statistics appears to be subjectively based, and can differ by a wide margin from topic to topic. Our earlier example of 5 women pursuing 1 man could become 4 or 3 pursuing 1 man, depending on how much of the female student population is not participating in courtship rituals. It should be noted that all these interviews are of women from bars in and around campus, and they are referring to men who visit the same bars, which is again a small fraction of the male student population. Many news articles and documentaries have discussed the changing demographics in post secondary education over the past 50 years. Most acknowledge several contributing factors. Men in their late teens and early 20s are more likely to opt for military service, skilled trades, or other physically demanding manual labor in hopes that they can transition to less physically demanding work in their 40s or 50s before their bodies break down. Or, if they can get into pro sports, they might be able to retire when their bodies can no longer handle the strain. Women are less likely to be willing to do such jobs for a variety of reasons. Their muscle mass and overall mass is typically lower when exiting high school. They may have plans to have children, which requires them to have a plan for their bodies to be in safe and sanitary conditions in their late 20s. They may avoid typically masculine jobs to protect themselves from harassment or abuse. Or they may feel social pressure to preserve their femininity by actively avoiding strenuous labor that might build too much muscle and give themselves mild gender dysphoria. Other contributing factors often cited are the prevalence of females only scholarships and bursaries, impacting the calculus of high school graduates. A man's choice might be to work at minimum wage for 4 years versus go 50K into debt and then be able to get double minimum wage after that. For him, the break even between the two financial strategies would be around age 28. For a woman, it would be between choosing minimum wage for 4 years versus only 10K in debt to get double minimum wage afterwards. So her break even between the financial strategies is around age 26. Even if we say that new graduate men are paid 10% more than new graduate women in the same field, that would still make her break-even point a few months earlier than his break-even point. In stable economic times, both the man and the woman would opt for the longer-term strategy, thinking about their total earnings by age 60 or 65 rather than thinking about their break-even point. However, the past 50 years, since 1975, have not been economically stable. A university degree does not protect you from layoffs or downsizing like it used to. Working at a factory isn't a guaranteed 40-year career anymore. Any layoffs or unemployment between ages 22 and 28 push that break-even point further into the future. Side note, my personal belief is that this economic turmoil has forced the past 2 generations to think more short-term than their predecessors just to survive. The Chad hypothesis often focuses on the social aspect and the conflict between men and women, rather than the economic aspects that align both men and women against a common foe. The Chad hypothesis continues. Women are making it worse for themselves without realizing it, then blaming men for not living up to their standards. Similar to employers, more on that later. Women enroll in colleges and careers in hopes of finding a high-quality man. For each individual, this is a logical decision. But similar to fluid dynamics or traffic flows, too many people following the optimal route causes it to stop being the optimal route. So many women are enrolling and graduating with degrees that lead to high-earning careers that there aren't enough men in their mid to late 20s who are earning more than these women. If enrollment and graduation was unlimited, this wouldn't be an issue. But since women are ruling out a certain percentage of the men and ruling out any man who isn't as educationally accomplished or financially accomplished as themselves, that's where we see the traffic jam. Women in their mid-20s out-earn men in their mid-20s, and this has been the situation since the late 1990s. The earnings potential flips backward when men and women enter their 30s, largely because women voluntarily exit the workforce for maternity leave and, when they re-enter, often work lower-paying jobs or shorter hours than they did before maternity leave. This trend is particularly extreme in the lawyer industry, but can be seen across other university-educated industries. Anthropologists know. The believers of the Chad hypothesis assert that childcare is the primary reason for the gender pay gap among people in their 30s, and that the gender pay gap among older people is a snowball effect from these disruptions earlier in life.
I need to get closer.
The assistance young women are given has led to the reverse gender pay gap in people in their mid 20s, and the believers' solution for this would be either universal childcare, to allow new mothers to return to the workforce sooner and have a smaller gap in their resume, leading to a smaller wage gap. Unionization, which could enforce payment based on productivity instead of payment based on seniority. Better work life balance for all, to reduce the gap between hourly employees versus salary employees, especially fighting against the idea of unpaid overtime leading to promotions and pay raises. Or leaning into the gender divide to equalize things for people in their mid 20s and go back to the more extreme pay gap of older people, often referred to as equality of opportunity. This hypothesis is rather focused on its core demographic and does not put forth any solutions for people in their 40s and 50s. An alternate solution, which Chad believers do not acknowledge, to combat the gender wage gap is to normalize the idea of women earning more than a man in a relationship and normalize the stay at home dad. If we eliminate the social pressure on women to find a suitable man who earns more money than her, then maybe some of these highly paid professional women would enter into happy relationships with lower paid men instead of being lonely and angry and burning out at their jobs, to then settle for less stressful and lower paid work, then justifying it to themselves to find a man who earns more than their new low salary but less than their old high salary. Believers of the Chad hypothesis view this conflict between the expectation to pursue high paying careers and the social pressure to find a man who supports her financially leaves modern women in a lose lose situation. Believers may blame this on feminism in general, but a more careful analysis reveals this to be complaining about a problem that feminism continues to attempt to resolve. A brief aside. Many historians separate feminism over the past 130 years into distinctive waves with different goals and tactics. The first wave in the early 1900s was the women's suffrage movement demanding the right to vote. The second wave in the 1940s demanded the right to work, and was spurred by World War II when more women entered the workforce while men were overseas and were unwilling to give up their autonomy when men returned. The third wave of the 1960s and 70s was the sexual liberation movement, which attempted to destigmatize intercourse and promote the idea that it can be pleasurable for women too. The fourth wave of the 2000s and 2010s attempted to stigmatize sexual harassment. It fought against catcalling and the sexual favor economy of Hollywood and corporate business, as well as sexist assumptions and stereotypes. It is unfortunate that the fourth wave of feminism overlapped with the post truth world. They were fighting to be heard and believed at the same time that the concepts of hearing people out and believing authorities were being phased out of society. If the fourth wave had succeeded, the fifth or sixth wave could have attempted to make gender as irrelevant as eye color to modern society. You don't list your eye color on your resume. You don't trust hazel eyes more than blue eyes. You don't assume that brown eyes have hidden motives that gray eyes don't. No eye color needs to cover up in public or is treated as if it belongs in certain occupations. When the sexes and genders are as irrelevant as eye color, people might still notice the differences, but they wouldn't see a blue-green eyed person and yell at them to choose blue or green. That future would be kind to non-binary, trans, and cis people. In case it wasn't clear, my comment about the resume is that many names are gendered currently, and the name on a resume can impact hiring decisions. Circling back to the comment about employers being similar to women in the chat hypothesis. Employers over the past 50 years have been treating their workers worse and worse, replacing guaranteed benefit retirement plans with non guaranteed investments. Instead of keeping their good employees for 40 years like they used to, modern companies will try to keep good employees at the lowest possible salary for 5 years at a time. And they won't fight too hard to keep them if they go to a higher paying job. This relates to women pursuing short term relationships instead of long term ones. It may technically be in the company's short term interest to pay their workers less and get as much unpaid overtime as possible, but it hurts the company in the long term because they have to spend so much extra time and money training replacements. For the young women, it may be gratifying and give them self confidence to go from partner to partner, but in the long term, they often don't learn how to survive on their own. So if they do get stuck in a bad relationship, they might still prefer it over being abandoned. The analogy gets a bit messy because human relationships aren't simple, but the underlying message from the Chad hypothesis is that corporations and women hold the assets, and that the employees and men are trying to get what they want and leave before they get exploited. The harsher the corporations and women are on their prospects, the less likely they are to keep the good ones, almost like gripping sand in your fist. This concludes section 2 of the Chad hypothesis. As we delve deeper into this topic, I hope you see that moving beyond the surface level of an ideology can reveal unexpected alignments and agreements between groups that outwardly disagree with each other. Finding common ground is a key part of conflict resolution.